Linked with my role in this college or anything? It's purely my own, sort of personal interpretation. Now that the first point is out of the way, second aspect is that the way he conducted his life, the way he went about doing things with resources, access he had to the resources and people and all that, should also inspire us in ways where we might not have the same resources, but at an individual level, what was the thought which prompted him to do what he did, and how we can draw inspiration from that, and we also can basically think similarly and see what little we can do for the progression of human development as he primarily did. So let's approach it like this. And one thing we'll have to understand is that first and foremost, I always felt PVG Garu must have been very deeply philosophical, because most of what he did, if you take from the time he was born, the circumstances he had to deal while he was a teenager, which his father, when his father, late Alaknarayan Gajpatraj Garu, Maharaja Alaknarayan Gajpatraj Garu passed away very young, and when PVG Raja Saheb was in his teens, his father was a great influence on him. He thoroughly missed his father, and even when his father was alive between 33 and 37, during that time, different circumstances meant that he was actually staying away from his father a little bit. The Court of Wards, then administering the estate, for different reasons, wanted to send Raja Saheb and his brother to London for studies, foreign shores for studies, which Raja Saheb's father opposed and went to court about. He fought in the courts and won the case to have PVG Garu educated in India. He won that case against the Court of Wards, who were hell-bent on sending Raja Saheb to foreign shores for education. The rationale of Alak Garu was that whoever is going to be the next prince of Vijayanagaram, if they are not grounded to the area where they would eventually have to work on, it would be difficult for them to connect with the grassroots. So he didn't want them to go there. He wanted them to study here. More importantly, even after he won the case to have PVG Garu and his brother also study here. Subsequently, he also made sure that wherever they studied here, Telugu was one of the subjects which was taught to them, because that was the only way he could do justice to the role he was going to be prepared for, which was that he needed to lead the Vijayanagaram estate. He had to be the Maharaja of Vijayanagaram. So that was the background. So and also people have to understand, Maharaja Alaknarayan Garu, while he passed away at a very young age, even at that very young age, his pattern was very different from typical princely states in those days. He hosted Mahatma Gandhi here in Vijayanagaram. He was very different from other contemporaries who were all part of Justice Party at that time, which was more closely affiliated with British thought process. They were not fighting British with the same level of seriousness as probably Congress Party was fighting and all those things. So Alaknarayan Garu actually won first elections as an independent with much larger majority than anyone in Justice Party. So he had a very fiercely nationalistic bent of mind. He was very different from many other heads of princely states, as you would call them. So he was very, very different. Now PVG Garu drew a lot of inspiration, I suppose, both maybe you could say genetically also, and from having been influenced by how he was conducting, Maharaja Alaknarayan Garu was conducting himself. So there was all that influence in a very young age. Then he had the trauma of his father passing away, staying away a little bit from his mother because Court of Wards was actually putting him separately where he was getting tutored, all that. So all that background was there. In that light, around 44, 45, he was coronated. Of course, British didn't use the word coronation because coronation was a word reserved only for British queen, so they used the word rendition, but in modern sense it is actually a coronation, so he was coronated again at a very young age. So these were the happenings at a very young age for him, and PVG Garu was actually trying to make sense of what is the burden which is coming onto his shoulders. He was weighted, I'm sure, he was weighed in by the huge sense of responsibility of wanting to carry forward the very, very different independent mindset of his father, legacy of the dynasty he was inheriting, and also aware of the changing circumstances. It was at that juncture when PVG Garu was taking over. It was at that juncture that the country was going through a lot of change. Independence was imminent. It was known independence would come. Independence came after he became Maharaja and while he was very young, and then during that phase where the republic was being formed, independence to republic being formed, during that phase there was a lot of transition, and PVG Garu was also part of that transition. He was having to think, how does his role, how does his legacy, how does what he had in store in life, what he was built to do, how does it change in the changed circumstance? All these factors were there. So there was a huge flux of changes which were happening during that time. So it was no ordinary time, because all his previous ancestors, it was a consistent thing. They had a very huge influence in the area, huge legacy, but the flow was same. But in Raja Saheb's time, everything suddenly was changing. So you have to understand the change context in which he needed to re-gauge how the definitions are going to change, how he needed to do. That's one aspect. The other aspect was that, as things were changing, people don't understand Raja Saheb as per the legacy of the family. He was inheriting a huge legacy. Family legacy was huge. It's a huge word because for a long time, generations together, they were in public cause. A lot of things, first school was established in 1857, we were just talking, in Vijayanagaram. Water to Vijayanagaram came thanks to Appalkonda Garu, who built the borewells near Gadigadda in Nellimarla and all. Everything basically essentially was public service for them. Small things. They did a huge, Abhinava Andhra Bhoja time lo, the patronage they gave to Gurjada Garu, Ravi Varma Garu. Ravi Varma Garu stayed in their guest house in Ooty. They were basically collaborating very closely. Gurjada Garu used to travel a lot with Abhinava Andhra Bhoja. The family had a huge legacy. So the legacy was not a simple legacy. And PVG Garu was inheriting that legacy, and he had an obligation to continue that legacy. Please understand, the reason I am talking about it is that you need to know the circumstances under which PVG Garu started his active career as a Maharaja 21-22. He was having all these things, and then the circumstances were changing. Then estate was abolished in 49. Then he refused compensation for estate abolition. Almost all princely estates took compensations. PVG Garu refused compensation. Estate was abolished, and but private estate compensation veru. He got his private estate, joint family properties Kakunda, as an eldest son who was to continue the legacy. He got what is called impactable estate. Now తెలుగులో చెప్పుకోవాలంటే ఇదివరకు రోజుల్లో, ఇప్పుడు పెద్ద ఎవరు పట్టించుకోవట్లేదు, కానీ జ్యేష్ఠ భాగం అని ఉండేది. సింపుల్గా చెప్పాలంటే ఇంపాక్టబుల్ ఎస్టేట్ అని కొద్దిగా అర్థం అవడం కష్టం, బట్ జ్యేష్ఠ భాగం అంటే మీకు అర్థం అవుద్ది. జ్యేష్ఠ భాగం అంటే ఏంటంటే, జ్యేష్ఠుడికి you will give a separate property, a family property, combined property, which is given to them so that they can continue the legacy of the family. జ్యేష్ఠుడు చేయాల్సిన బాధ్యతలు కొన్ని ఉంటాయి, సో ఫ్యామిలీ లెగసీ కంటిన్యూ చేయడానికి. సో PVG గారికి he got what is called impactable estate, like that. Eldest male lineal descendant, he got the జ్యేష్ఠ భాగం. Joint family properties were distributed among all brothers and all. సో హీ హ్యాడ్ ద బర్డన్. నా జ్యేష్ఠ భాగం ఇప్పుడు రోజులు ఎవరు పట్టించుకోరు. జ్యేష్ఠ భాగం జ్యేష్ఠుని కాబట్టి నాకు ఎక్కువ వాటా కావాలి, ఆస్తి కావాలని, ఆ మైండ్ సెట్ వేరు. Now, Jyeshta Bhagam comes with a lot of responsibility. So, PVG Garu, Raja Saheb was looking at that responsibility. So, immediately I'm sure, when I have my own, again, these are all interpretations, right? He must be thinking, he must have thought. Now, what is the legacy that I have to take forward? How is it that I can ensure that the legacy he has the weight of expectations of people who are looking to him to see how he would continue the legacy of his dynasty. It is his duty, and basically, because estates were abolished, like many other princely states, he could have easily said, no, he has no legal obligation to do anything actually. But yet he felt obligated, I'm sure, to continuing the family legacy. So first, it's very important, I feel, that we should look at PVG Garu from this context to start with. The primary motivation for him was, at that stage I feel, family legacy, born this family, these circumstances. What is the purpose of my life? Why am I in this situation? What is it that is expected of me? How can I make my life as it is being created, as the circumstances are? How do I make my life count? I'm sure that is basically the fundamental thought or the philosophy which was basically the motivational factor for him. So he was thinking. And he was a very deep thinking person. He was fiercely independent minded. He was not a person who is given to acting based on how people will appreciate me. He never gave a damn about what. That was not the driving force for him. The driving force for him was, I'm sure, searching for the definition of his life as it was created. What is the purpose of his life? Given the context in which he was born and the context in which he was pushed to, what is the purpose of his life as must have been defined by obviously God or whoever, God who created that life for him. What is the purpose? He must have been deeply thinking of how do I make my circumstance, my life count. So that was the prime motivation I felt. So I'm sure he would have thought about it, what to do, Jyeshta Bhagam and all, how do I make. Then I'm sure he basically was resolved in his mind that I have to use this estate for a purpose which would ensure that the legacy of my dynasty would continue and I would make a contribution to human development civilization. He was deeply motivated, and I think at that stage he defined his purpose of life as I have to use all resources which have come to me with the life which has been created. I have to use this for the overall development of civilization, humanity, and to the extent that I can make a difference to the world around me and beyond. I can contribute to the society around me, where whatever I have been part of, whatever resources have been given to me, I should use them for purposes which would make a lasting impact and a progressive impact on the civilization and nation around me. And nation also was going through a flux at that time, change. We are getting independence and all that. So the prime drivers, I am very sure, must have been that. He was very motivated, and he was already very different thinking. He was very deeply philosophical even then. For example, when during those times it was prestigious to go hunting, claim how many tigers you hunted. In fact, Raja Saheb's family had a huge legacy of tiger hunting and all that. Sir Vijay Garu, who was Raja Saheb's uncle, had a record of this many hunts and all that. But PVG Garu was not motivated by that. Not that he hated it or anything, he just didn't, that was not a passion for him. Similarly, a lot of people at that time in those ages, princely states, a lot of Yuvarajas, kings and all, were very interested in these fancy sports like polo and things like that. Raja Saheb was never interested in those kinds of things. It is also a sign that even at that very young age, he was very independent thinking. He had his own mind. He was already deeply engaged with his own, you could say, Antratma value system, whatever was guiding him to try and make sense of what he needs to do with his life. How can he make a difference? So he was deeply engaged with himself, I believe, already at that young age, much before many other influences had come. So his primary thing was that how do I continue my family legacy and do justice to the very definition of my life and how it has been created with all these endowments which has come to me. So that was his primary motivation. There was no extraneous thing like a lot of people say, oh, he had to surrender these things. Nothing. There was no force at that time. Nothing. He was fully independent to do what he wanted to do. But he chose to be what he wanted to be. So all that happened, and he was thinking. He went to Columbia in 49. He studied there for probably one semester. He himself, there's a statement which says, I went there as a Maharaja, came back as a common man, because estate was abolished in between that period. So he went with an official title of Maharaja, but when he came, estate was abolished. But he came, and he was a very good sportsman. For example, he was a very good cricket player. He was a very good tennis player. He was actually a golf champion for the state at that time. So he was a very avid sportsman, and he was a dynamic personality and all that. But even at that age, he was, again, like I said, fiercely independent-minded, deeply philosophical, more preoccupied with how he wanted to do things in terms of what he inherited from his family. So he thought about it. I'm sure many would have questioned. Once the estate was abolished, in 51 the Madras Endowment Act had come. Of course, there was an Endowment Act before, but Madras Endowment Act had come, and Raja Saheb formally was made the hereditary trustee of all the 105 temples. He was already a hereditary trustee, but once the estate was abolished, the government took over all the endowments. He formally became a hereditary trustee. Even in those days, there he went to court for one small thing, which was that he wanted to ensure that Simhachalam had the task also to help the other temples who were economically not as much endowed. So he got an order there where Simhachalam temple will continue to support other temples within these 108 temples. So he wanted that. And then he went on, and then he was thinking, the family patronage was continuing till that time. Chowdhury in Vijayanagaram, which used to feed students who were studying in Mansas institutes and Sanskrit college and those colleges which were also part of Maharaja's family, which were surrendered to government because he felt government would better run a Sanskrit college. And some colleges were given, music college and Sanskrit college were handed over to the government. They were run by Maharaja's family, but they were handed over to the government. And this Chowdhury which was being run, he wanted to make sure it will be supported for eternity. And once the estate was abolished, the immediate question was that the royal family was patronizing it. Now the estate, royal family as a entity, legal entity, is no longer there in that sense. As a royalty is not there after estate abolition. Now how do we ensure we make this patronage for education, which had already been happening by that time, school 1857, MR College in 1879, already had a deep legacy. He somehow wanted to make sure this support continues, no matter what happens. So he was thinking on those lines. The first thing which came to his mind was that what happens to Chowdhury, now that endowment, support has to continue. So how do I make sure it continues? So before he could think of a longer term solution, immediately he just in Srikakulam, Niddaman oka village unte akkada oka 375 acres he identified, gave it to Simhachalam and told them this land is being given to you so that you can give prasadam to Mansa students in Chowdhury every single day for about 300 any students unte antamandi. Now it's running with about 450 students maximum peak. So that was made much before Mansas came, around 53, 54. He made that arrangement. And then subsequently, of course, Mansas was created. Again, basically the thought was, how could I make the difference with the endowment? What kind of difference can I make? And again, please understand, PVG Garu is not a person who did things only to get appreciation for people. In fact, he was probably the most nonchalant person. He never thought like that. He wanted to do what is good. He felt, I feel like his motivation was deeply more philosophical than that. It was more driven by what his answers to himself was in terms of what is the definition of his birth, what is the definition of his existence. He was more working on that philosophical plane, not to satisfy people or anything. He had a deep vision. Education was something which the family was supporting. Arts, education was something family legacy. So he wanted to continue that legacy. He wanted to ensure continuity of that legacy, no matter what happens. So that was one thing. He got inspired by, when he went to Columbia, he heard a lecture of Albert Einstein. He was got interested in nuclear physics. Then Gyanananda Garu was there. He got introduced to Gyanananda. All those associations also had influence on how to do it. He wanted to somehow make an arrangement for continuing legacy, so he was trying to formulate an idea. There were other people who probably were questioning him at that time. How can you give all this away? You are not legally obligated to give all this away. But he was not going to listen to any of those people. He had his own sense of what the obligation is for the dynasty. What was he inheriting as a part of imperitable estate, both the asset and the responsibility. He was more focused on responsibility also. He inherited along with the asset. So he was thinking very deeply about it, and then Mansas happened. He created Mansas, and please understand, he was not thinking of ఏదో అవసరంతో ఎవరో వస్తే చేయటం వేరు. He basically created things which are seeding. Basically, he seeded things without anyone coming and asking him, because he wanted to create an ecosystem on his own. The initiative was from his side. He wanted to create an ecosystem of all types. ఏదన్నా ఉందనుకోండి, ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ ఇప్పుడు మీరు చాలా మంది ఏయులో ఈ పిహెచ్డి ఇంటర్వ్యూస్కి వెళ్ళిన వాళ్ళకి తెలుస్తుంది. అట్లే అటువైపు సిబిఐ డౌన్ లో విజయనగరం హౌస్ ఉంటుంది. దట్ వాజ్ ద హౌస్ వేర్ హీ లివ్డ్ ఫర్ అ లాంగ్ టైమ్. He gave it to Andhra University for a very notional cost, just ఊరికే పేరుకి, because he thought it would be more useful there. A lot of things he gave not because ఎవరో వచ్చి అడిగితే కాదు. He felt this particular thing would be asset, or a particular thing would be more useful, more productively used in a certain context. So if such a context existed, you use this for that purpose. So that's the very, and Mansas also was similar. Education institutes, we needed to promote education, and it would, if you go back to 68 and much before, when Mansas was formulated, ante Mansas mundu progenitors, even MR College 1879, if you go back, maybe every 20 years of generation anukunte, how many years, 130, 140 years history lo, you go back to 5-6 generations in Vijayanagaram, this geographical area, almost one in every maybe fourth or one in every fifth family across these past 6 generations would have been touched by Mansas. And imagine the level of empowerment. It's not education. Fundamental lives have been changed for not that generation but for next set of generations because of Mansas. All that could not have been possible without that. Imagine a situation where not only did he set up Mansas, but imagine when teacher training was a deep gap, and when the realization was, unless we had very good trained teachers, catering to the education needs at all levels for such a population which was for a longish time removed from formal education was not going to be easy. So therefore, he created a BED institution, and it was not a casual effort. He created a model school, so that whatever you do in BED, you can experiment in the model school. So please understand that you create a lab experimental setup, almost like a model school. The school itself was called model school, because you test your teaching tools, teaching aids in a model school. So it was a very, whatever he did was basically a complete thing. And then he started women's college in 62. Imagine in Vijayanagaram, given the conservative area we are in, women would otherwise, if there was no women's college, you can imagine how many women would have been struggling for access to education. It was a transformative kind of initiative in those days. In fact, for a longest time after that, teachers were also women. So many women teachers came out. The college thrived in those days. Now women's college is less relevant with changing time, because Why is it less relevant now? Because of the success of that time. Otherwise it would have still been relevant. The fact that women's colleges are not relevant today is actually a success story. Because it has achieved what it is supposed to achieve. Women's colleges have achieved what they are supposed to achieve. Again, a very transformative thought. He believed in diversity of education. That's why you had all these eclectic kind of course combinations, geology. All those were very new. No colleges had all these kinds of things. He introduced BSc for the first time. It was not there at that time in many places. So, and he had huge focus on creating a diverse set of things, humanities, everything. Because he was looking at civilizational development, education as an empowerment tool for civilizational development. So again, at every step of the way, his focus really was on seeing what is it that I can do where the meaning of my life, I realize the meaning of my life as I understand it. I create maximum possible value for what I have been offered as a chance merely by being born in the context I was born. He tried to basically make sense of that, derive a sense of purpose from that. Again, very deeply philosophical I felt, because see, a lot of people talk about he had huge socialist influence. Yes, all influences were there. That also tells you he was very open-minded. But please understand, his primary influence doesn't come from any of these things. His primary influence comes from a thorough introspection of what is the legacy I have to continue, family legacy. Please understand, his primary objective was to continue the family legacy and understand a sense of purpose for his life, the way it came, how not only being born in that dynasty, but being born at a time where it was going through a fundamental change. Timing also is providence created. You don't decide the time you are born. So all that basically made him think deeper, I felt, and he defined his purpose then. He was very open-minded. For those days, he was very welcome to new ideas. Any person he interacted with, he would work with them very closely. He was not a person who stayed aloof in that sense. He wanted people to be sharing ideas with him. He merged with people who could give him some kind of inspiration or some kind of an extra vehicle where he could deliver what he wanted to deliver to people. In that context only, Swami Gyanananda was a huge influence. The socialist leaders, it could be Lohia, JP, all those leaders also were a huge influence for him at some point. At different points, he was always searching for vehicles or inspirations through which he could do more. He was first and foremost a humanist. He was a person who wanted to do what he could and make sense of his life's purpose. That was his prime motivation, I felt, and every single acquaintance he had, every single association he had was basically a vehicle or a chance for him to see if there is anything more he can do or anything better he can do through this association. Maybe a new idea, maybe a new way in which he could do what he wanted to do. So all these happened over a period of time. He was associated with socialist leaders. He was very passionate about the causes. Again, like I said, he fought in those days for good compensation for people. Again, not like today's fights where people fight only so that they can garner people's appreciation. He fought because he thought compensation for people whose land is acquired is a right, fundamental right, and that is true with utilitarian theory. So he was very well read. He was very deeply concerned about doing what is fundamentally right, and he was very deeply concerned about people's right for freedom, people's right to get due compensation for their property which is being acquired. All those, he was a very libertarian kind of mind in that sense. He wanted those kinds of things. So he fought for those things. He fought for farmers at different stages. But again, at no stage, I feel personally that he was looking for people to appreciate him or anything. In fact, I felt he was very, very, if you go through it, he was very nonchalant about it. Even if one person didn't acknowledge what he did, I think he would have cared less actually. He would just go about doing what he felt. His sense of purpose was answering to his own conscience, answering to his own inner call. was basically what was driving him forward at various stages. He associated when in Majjalo he might have probably felt socialist flank, while theoretically it was okay. The leaders were being too dispersed in their thoughts to be productive. He disassociated, he went on his own way, no disrespect to anyone. He just said, okay, maybe this is not a channel where I can be as productive as I want to be. He just moved on, he went. He never compromised on his purpose. He never disrespected anyone. He worked with people who thought will help him in his cause, which is to continue in his efforts to try to be as humanitarian as he could be. He was working on his own channel. So, to lock PVG Garu or Raja Saheb into any one ism is not doing justice to what he was. He was not bound by any of these things. Frankly speaking, he didn't get inspiration around 50. He was inspired right from the beginning. If you see, he rejected the compensation for estate abolition in 49. Much of what he did was much earlier than meeting these people. So he was basically already in his zone. He was working in his zone. He was doing what he wanted to do at various stages. Once he gave place to the Polytechnic College Society. Anything. Basically, he was basically like this. He said, anything where a particular asset or a particular thing I have in my possession which I can allow to be used for a purpose which would then add value to humanity, he was happy to do it. He was promoting all kinds of causes. He was very well read. So that was his life. He was going on like that. He had a serious accident, and a lot of doctors at that time said he survived only because of his yoga. He was doing Sirsasana, people say, for 45 minutes a day. Sirsasana for that long is not possible, but he had that thing. So that is why apparently the German doctors who treated him after a while in terms of his recuperation said the only way he recuperated like that was probably because of his yoga and all. He was very spiritual in that sense. Any cause, not only education, for example, he built that Hyderabad race course. He was part of the people who bought that land from the original Nizam and gave it for race course road. Lots of those things. He did quite a lot for sports promotion. You cannot fathom, how much anything which he could do, he tried to do. Despite his accident where his life slowed down a little bit, he was still reasonably active in terms of seeing what all he could do for the society. So that is how his life had gone on. His legacy is actually one where we should all understand that, the lives of people in this place fundamentally got transformed because of the access to education he has created. Of course, it's a legacy of his family, but he had no obligation to continue it after estates were abolished, but he still did it, and he did it grandly. And basically that continued for a long time, and it's still continuing. The Mansa's legacy created, and a lot of people have this misconception somehow. Land ceiling came in 68 and 70. Mansas was formed in 58. There was no land ceiling and all then. He felt obligated to create it with his own conscience. There was no other legal complaint, and no land ceiling works for urban lands. How many urban lands did he give? So people can talk. See, part of the reason why people create these misconceptions of Raja Saheb, one thing people have to understand is, it's difficult to imagine someone doing this. So therefore people say it must not be true. Now that is where Raja Saheb is different. It is difficult to do, and only one person could have done it, and that is Raja Saheb. Basically that's where the crux of the story is, and he did it. And his inspiration was that ultimately I feel like wherever he is today, I am sure he is still, without a care about people around him, he is still thinking of what can I do with whatever I have to help humanity progress. That's the kind of person he was, and he probably continues to be wherever he is. It was never about other people around him. It was never about that. He always had a clear purpose which he defined for himself, and he went on about his purpose very clearly with distinct thought. Even much after, a lot of times he was after accident, I think I heard, that he was offered the deputy CM post, and he consulted his mentor, and they said, no, this is not what your life purpose is or whatever, and he basically declined it. His speeches, now if you see the many things, generally what people talk, seed fund, what is Mansur seed fund? People talk about PPP, private public partnership. Now what is grant in aid? He created grant in aid. It's private public partnership where private colleges were there before independence, sponsored by patrons, were there with infrastructure. But after estate abolition, a lot of those colleges with all the infrastructure, they were in doubt. There was a doubt whether they could continue to run and strive. That's one aspect. Now government did not have enough colleges, and it was practically impossible to create this kind of infrastructure instantaneously. So how do you ensure that the education continues? So he created grant in aid was one of the thoughts which came in. He was a big pusher for that, which was private public partnership, as government would give salaries for the teachers, private institutes will continue the infrastructure, and then education will continue unabated. That was another concept of private public partnership. Even if you see share investments, his initial investments were all what you would call today with these grand words like entrepreneurship and all. His investments were all, about 80% was in greenhorn companies, like in those days, 60s and 50s, Whirlpool, Kelvinator. So he just invested not because he wanted to earn money. He invested to promote entrepreneurship. He was a huge promoter of entrepreneurship even in those days. He was promoting it. He started poultry farming here, not because he wanted to earn money. He wanted to encourage poultry business here. He did lots of entrepreneurial activities where he was interested in seriously promoting business activity. Korkonda Sainik School, when he felt Sainik schools were required, he actually bought that land from his brother. It was in his share, the 285 acres he bought, and gave it to Sainik School for free with the palace. Those things, it was just done as a matter of routine for him. It was not like anything which I can do, he would just go and do those things. That was one thing. Investments was one thing. Poultry farming. There are speeches where he talks about, even in those days, he talks about when people talked about liquor abolition. He said, while it's a good idea that you want to contain people's consumption of liquor, because unbridled consumption of liquor is bad. He expressed concern. It's not implementable, he said. Now if you see, it's proven now that it's not easy to implement. He said, see, the cost of implementation is higher than the benefits you would get. He said, it's better to be able to educate people on controlled consumption, or educate people so they can devise their own mechanisms to desist from excessive consumption. So he talked about those things. He talked about building modern day new concepts, the theater command, army, China and India, now they're talking about theater commands, integrated commands, armed forces, navy and air force. Earlier they were three separate. Now they're creating theater commands where a particular theater of war, let's say China border is a theater of war, you have a theater command which has integration of these three forces, they can work. Theater commands are new. In those days he proposed theater command. In parliament speeches he talked about theater command in those days. So everything he put his mind on. He was very, very elaborate in his thought. He was interested in nation building. He was always looking at how we can develop as a nation. Even in those days he talked about Middle East being sort of meddled by the superpowers of this day. US and Russia were creating this conflict zone in Middle East. He was telling how they are basically creating this eternal conflict zone, which could be a huge problem, and that is what it turned out to be. So lots of things. And MR College, if in the beginning, India, because of Nehruvian policies, India was working very closely with Soviet Union. A lot of our industrialization, which we were lagging, was being supported by Russia. A lot of instrumentation, everything was Russian. Lot of collaboration had to happen with Russia because we were relying heavily on Russian industrialization support. So language was becoming a barrier to learn, for our engineers to learn. Otherwise we will always eternally depend on Russia. Somehow we could tech transfer avvalante, our people have to get educated, work with Russians, come. Therefore he introduced Russian language here. వెళ్ళిపోయి ఢిల్లీ వెళ్ళిపోయి ఫస్ట్ రష్యన్ కోర్స్లో ఒక స్టూడెంట్ని, యాక్టివ్ స్టూడెంట్ని తీసుకొని బలవంతంగా ఆయన ఫోర్స్ చేసేసి మరాఠీ పర్సన్ దోతే అని రష్యన్ స్టూడెంట్ని he convinced him to come to Vijayanagaram and teach Russian because he wanted to ensure that our students get the exposure required to be able to work very closely with Russia in those days. So he was very interested in basically doing anything and everything which could help society move forward, humanity progresses, civilizational development happens, all aspects integrated together. Every single contribution of his, be it in whichever ministry he worked, wherever he worked, he was always interested in giving productive suggestions. He was actually, a lot of these things are anecdotes. He argued that wealth tax is counterproductive because why would people create wealth if wealth tax is like tax over tax? He said, see, wealth tax is okay if you talk about non-productive wealth. He clearly differentiated between wealth tax when you put, there is non-productive wealth like gold jewelry I have, non-productive. But if you are going to put wealth tax on share market investments, for example, it is productive deployment of money. If you tax that, people will withdraw that money. So imposing wealth tax on productive wealth is counterproductive. It will be detrimental to people investing. So he argued against wealth tax there. Put wealth tax on non-productive wealth. So he was very, very clear on what his thought was, why certain things are good, why certain things. He was very, very intellectual in that sense. He was very deeply thinking of every particular issue. So that's the level of depth with which he participated. Now in today's world, what happens is we sit here, Mansas, he was a chairman, he was a founder of Mansas. So as a matter of routine, we might praise our chairman, we all get paid of course by Mansas. So, but PVG Garu is not that kind, he's not a person who is actually, I'm sure he will, wherever he is sitting, he must be twitching in his seat. He doesn't like, I'm sure he doesn't like all this. What he would like is if people understood what was the thought behind. The reason I want to talk like this is that I'm sure he will be more interested, not pleased. In the praises would never satisfy him. He would have been more interested in this conversation wherever he is if he thought that this discussion helps people understand what was his motivation, what was the drive. Because he was not driven by recognition. He was driven by a desire to be able to use everything within his means to advance the civilization, humanity and the nation to the extent he was a deep visionary. He did things in the long term. He created Mansas to empower people with education. He didn't distribute money, throw money at people. He threw education at people. This is empowering. He was more long term. He always looked at long term. How can we build people? How can we build capabilities? How can we build people into individuals who could feed themselves and be part of larger nation building exercise. So he was more a visionary. He was more a person who wanted to look at things from a long term perspective, and all those kinds of things. People, he's more, you could say he was, Raja Saheb is what we all refer to him as. The princedoms, Maharaja and all might have been gone. But if you see, he is still and will continue to be the Maharaja of the empire of, a thought process which basically is interested in promoting humanity development with everyone motivated by contributing to that development. That is the empire, that's the virtual empire of people he wanted to establish, and he continues to be the lord of that empire. There is no second thoughts over it. He was always that. He was more interested in developing the world around him, people around him. He seriously contributed to that exercise. And again, where did it all start? again, inspiration from his father, the life. I think he also felt a deep sense of, responsibility that he had to live his father's life also for him. His father died very young. He was a very deeply inspirational person. Alaknarayan Garu would have been a luminary if he lived longer. He is still a very huge luminary, but for the kind of talent he had, what he was, he could have been a lot more than what he was. I think PVG Garu, inner of inner, he also had the responsibility of wanting to live his father's life for him the way he wanted to live also. That's a deep legacy. That's why he named, though PVG Garu is not a very sentimental person, I think he had a huge level of sentiment for his father. Mansas, therefore the name. He felt a huge sense of sentiment as far as his father was concerned. He was very deeply attached to his father. That inspiration continued. So all these are what Raja Saheb was. So we all can see it was always about what you could do to the country's progress, what you could do to the development. He never had any hang-ups. You hear stories like he slept in the railway compartment bottom. See, for him, I don't think he would have thought about it also. He's just unconscious. He basically was fiercely independently minded, fiercely unconscious of the surroundings. He just went in his own world. Basically, he just gave a damn about what was happening. It was not like he was conscious of, I'm sleeping, I'm a Maharaja, I'm sleeping downstairs. Nothing like that. He just said, okay, I want to fall asleep. Where can I, this place seems convenient. That's the way it was always. It was never about, I want to show off to people that I'm sleeping. He never even thought about it for a second, I felt. From what we see, anecdotes and all, it was not like he gave a huge amount of thought to those things also. When JP came south, he was driving JP all across south. He was on the wheel. He was driving JP all around because in those days, he was very inspired by JP. He thought JP's, whatever JP's movement was, could help awaken people, could help society change in a way which is good. So he basically offered to drive JP around, all around. Nothing. He was not conscious of any of this. Why should I do it? If he calls 20 drivers might come. He doesn't have to drive. But the question was not that. He wanted to be the person who is at the fulcrum of what is happening. He always wanted to be engaged. If he felt that this is something I want to be engaged with, he would be engaged. It doesn't matter who that is. X, Y, Z was not the motivation for him. At various stages, he really got inspired by JP. He got inspired by Ram Manohar Lohia, a different socialist. Mehta. In fact, Ashok Garu was named after a socialist leader, Ashok Mehta. The name Ashok, Anand Garu's name is in the family. Ashok is a new name in the family. Ashok is not a name which has been there in the family. Ashok Garu was named after a very close friend of PVG Garu or an acquaintance and a communist, a socialist leader, Ashok Mehta. So he was named after Ashok Mehta. He drew inspiration from those kinds of situations. So he always acted on his own. He was fiercely open-minded. So that is the life of Raja Saheb. So when we do this, when we are celebrating the centenary year, I feel like the biggest tribute we can give him is to see how we might not, each one of us, I always think like this, I might not have even like a 0.001% of the means of what Raja Saheb has at that day. But then whatever means I have, how do I define my life for eternity? How do I ensure that the purpose for which I have been brought to this world gets satisfied to the level it can be? How can I make sense of it? How can I leave an imprint of it before I leave? That means my purpose has been realized a little bit, at least a part of. So I have to understand, reflect on what the purpose of my life is, what are the means I have, and with that means how can I contribute to humanity. Contributing to humanity might be just doing what you can. It's not like, see, I don't believe in this concept of helping the society. If you can contribute to the society, society will recognize you. Why are you born otherwise? You do something. And what is that purpose? What is it that you can do more effectively? How can you optimize yourself and the resources you have for the overall larger progression of humanity or world while you live a satisfied life. You make true, or you do justice to the life which has been given to you, and live. Basically, that's the essence of what Raja Saheb felt is what I feel. But that's that. So we all have to draw inspiration from that. We'll have to be better individuals, and we should feel very happy that we've been associated. We are associated with Marxists. And finally, just to close out, all I say is that Raja Saheb has been averse to prizes. That's why even recently for Centenary, there was a proposal to set up a statue of PVG Raju. But basically, because Raja Saheb was never into this statue building and all that, so we thought maybe it's not the best tribute for Raja Saheb and it would not make him happy. That was one of the thoughts. A statue for him is a statue of thought, actually. So you think in the direction of what Raja Saheb would have liked and do what you can in line to that thought. That would be the best possible tribute to Raja Saheb, and long may the legacy of Raja Saheb continue. But he was inspirational in many ways. We'll have to look at the fundamental thought process behind the different actions which Raja Saheb did. Some of them are very diverse from each other, but the common thread I feel is basically his passion to try and see what best he can do with the life which was given to him, how best he can translate it into value to humanity. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about. Thank you for this opportunity, and the idea is to try and share this with as many people as want. That's why we put this recording. I don't know how well it has come out because I have not planned any of these things. I have come and talked impromptu. There is no plan in what I wanted to talk. I just came here. The words flew. I don't know whether it's come out well or not, but we will see. We'll try and play it to the students. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.